problematic is the kind of the level of suffering. Obviously, there's lots of different ways people can suffer, and kind of our kind of ideal customer is someone who this will obviously benefit tremendously. But obviously, kind of reflecting back between suffering and scale, obviously, the more people you reach, you might also find people on the other end of the spectrum who only suffer somewhat. So I guess those two things kind of reflect off each other to an extent.
Okay.
But obviously a lot of our work so far, as you say, has been kind of looking at numbers, conducting customer surveys, and I guess trying to justify our idea back to ourselves and see if the problem is real and to see kind of how much our intended solution resonates. So definitely, I think your framework is spot on.
Okay, so this excites me because most of the times, and in most social enterprises that I mentor, most people kind of jump over the problem and they get straight into the idea. And when I ask them about the details of the idea, they generally find it challenging. So because of that, let's just jump into our first exercise. Before we actually look at testing the idea, I want you guys to actually fill out then your intentionality statements. And your intentionality statements are just your summary of your idea. Right? So my idea, for example, is driver for drivers. So what I want to do in response to the challenges at Uber is to develop a new ride-sharing app owned and controlled by the drivers, right? So given all the challenges, the fact that they don't have control over their money, the fact that they are not incentivized to actually go to the insurance companies to help with income variability, all those things, I came up with an idea, Driver for Drivers, that's the name. And it's a new ride-sharing app owned and controlled by the drivers. And very clearly, my intentionality with this app is to tackle their financial challenges, to address sporadic and falling income during pandemics, recessions, or times of economic uncertainty, which is important to me and my co-founder because many low-income families, migrant, refugee families are dependent on these platforms for their livelihood. And without consistent income, they will fall into poverty. So what I want us to do is I want everybody who is actually developing a business or an idea, develop their intentionality statement now in the next 5 minutes. And what we're going to do then is then build a series of important tests to help you test this intentionality. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions? So Jennifer, can you put the template in the chat room?
Yeah.
So that everybody can access it. So the first step is you understand your problem. The next step now is that you have to develop a very clear intentionality statement saying, this is my solution and this is the problem that my solution will address. And you guys don't have to have it perfectly, but you need it clear enough because for us to develop tests, your intentionality has to be pretty clear, right? Doesn't have to be perfect, but it has to be pretty clear. So it's now 6:25. So if I can give everybody 5 minutes to take the time, if you have your co-founder with you right now, you can get them on WhatsApp, you can chat with them separately, but each of you guys have 5 minutes, and I'll tell you when it's 1 minute to kind of come up with just a quick and dirty intentionality statement so that when we start testing, you guys can also develop tests. My objective for today is that you actually leave the session with tests developed so that you could go and test certain things in the market. Okay, so 5 minutes and I will tell you guys when. So at 6:31, we're going to stop. Does anyone have any questions about the intentionality statement? As I said, there's a PowerPoint file that Jennifer has uploaded, or you can just jot it down. It's really simple. We want to tackle
I'm having trouble to drop the file in the chat, so I'll work on it.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Just work from this. It's super, super simple. As you can see, anybody can understand my business. I want to create an app where a ride-sharing app owned and controlled by the drivers, right? To address all the issues that I have. And this is my intentionality. So I'm very clear about what my intention is in developing this app. So you guys have 5 minutes and I'll tell you when time is almost up. Okay, take your time. One more minute, everyone. Okay, you guys should be wrapping up now. Is any brave soul ready to share their intentionality statement? By the way, I know I'm not lecturing right now, but I want to say that these things like intentionality statements are really, really important to a social enterprise. What was proven is that intentionality statements are what we call performative. And the word performative means that it affects the performance of the founding team, because it helps unify and clarify and create shared understanding around everybody, that if you and your founding members come together and develop an intentionality statement, it not only gives you a unified voice when you're speaking to anyone. Literally, this can roll off my tongue every time I speak to someone, but it also ensures that the team is unified around the language and the meaning and the purpose of the social enterprise. So these intentionality statements that seem like silly things, they're very performative. And the reason why I'm making you do it is because I want you to write it down and concretize exactly what, at this stage of your knowledge, your social enterprise is about. So is there a brave soul that wants to share their intentionality statement? I would love to hear at least what one or two of your companies are about, and then we'll go into testing.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, I would love you to.
Hi, everyone. My name is Niharika. So I'm the only person who's kind of working towards starting this thing. I don't have a co-founder yet. And I would love your reviews. I mean, if you have any opinion, please feel free to share them. So through the app that I am trying to develop, I want to tackle the impact the excessive content we have access to has, it on our mental health and in turn on our physical health, especially because in the past 1 year, I found it very crucial to, it was very important for me to stay up to date with what was happening around me, but because of the way news was being reported, it kind of impacted my mental health and I became really depressed. So for who? It is for the people who use social media to kind of get news updates, and they only rely on applications that can be downloaded on phone. It addresses the problem that I find very difficult, to deal with, is that there are several platforms, there are several news channels, there are several websites. You have access to them 24/7. You can log on to their website any time of the day. Still, you will remain less informed. And the problem is this kind of affects your routine, and you don't even realize how from being informed and being vigilant, you go to just being lethargic, and you start procrastinating because you have too much information but you don't know what to do. And why is it important to me? Because I think knowing the right thing in the right, I don't know how to say this, quantity, as in if you are to be aware of statistics or the method, if you just know that, it is more than enough, and you don't need to know anything else besides that. So this is what I have. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's really interesting. And I think that's really noble, actually, and really, there's a lot of debate about this. What is the difference between information and data and what's needed? So I think it's a very sort of courageous project, if I'm honest, and very much needed. I would say that your problem specificity, not for this session, but for a future session, you need to spend a little more time specifying exactly what's the nature of the problem. Is it a cognitive overload problem? Is it a peer pressure problem? Is it a news filtering problem? In other words, the fact that the news only filters certain types of news to certain types of people, and that kind of thing that gives you a limited perspective. So I would say that in the future, I would deep dive a little more in detail into the problem. But as an idea, it's an excellent idea. I think it's very topical, very needed. And I think it's a really good start, to be quite honest. And I can hear your passion, which is really important in a social enterprise. And the fact that it's affected you, and it affected you in terms of depression and stuff, makes it an even more powerful story. So I think it's a great jumping off point. Let's hear one more, and then we will actually get into testing your ideas.
Sorry,
Hi.
I'm very happy to go ahead. My name is
Yes, I'm excited.
Great. So basically, I want to provide an effective and attractive method for people who aspire to make a difference, but they are confused as to what cause they feel strongest about, how they want to go about making this impact, and they lack a very clear action plan to actually translate this aspiration into action. And the way I want to go about this is basically using coaching tools to basically help people gain clarity on all of these elements, and to make the way they will impact this cause as inspiring and personalized and exciting as possible. And
oh, we've lost you. Hello? Oh, don't worry. I'll have you present again at the end, because we're going to present your cause, and some people are going to present their intentionality statement and their tests. Okay, so let's move on, because as I said, we're going to present intentionality statement and test. So we'll have you present again, don't worry. So now that you guys understand, and we're very clear as to what purpose of the organization that you're about to launch, the social enterprises, the next step is really now to move from, okay, I think I'm stuck. Okay, so the next step is to actually move from this uncertainty where we've already defined the problem worth pursuing, and we've already defined our idea, and it's now the idea of how do we now validate that idea to figure out if it's an idea worth pursuing. And basically, another way of saying that is, how do we stress test all the ideas that you've written down in your intentionality statement to make sure that it has good product market fit or good idea market fit, that it fits the market, that it's scalable, that it's doable, that it's feasible, that the market desires it. How do we actually stress test the idea? Okay, and that's what today's session is really about. So in terms of stress testing the idea, and again, I just keep, so I may need to stop and reshare the screen because it's just sticking, sorry. Let's do that again. So in terms of stress testing the idea, the most, okay, it's still not working. In order to stress test the idea, the most viable approach is, I think many of you have heard of it before, which is minimum viable testing. And I want to actually talk you through a simple way of understanding minimum viable testing and to see how you can apply it to your ideas already. So what I want to know is, where are you on the minimum viable testing scale? So I want you to put up your hands. How many people, clearly I gave some pre-reading, so you should know at least a little bit. So I know nothing or I know very little. Can people raise their hands if they're at 1? Because it depends on how I teach the rest of the session. How many people are at 1? If you raise your hands, no one. How many people, I've done a bit of it, but I'm no expert. How many people are at 2? Raise your hand in the actual Zoom so that I can actually count. Okay, yeah, okay. So most people are at 2. How many people are at 3? It's like, I am almost expert level. I can pretty much teach this session, but because I am a social entrepreneur, I'm always willing to learn something new. So if the people who did 2 can put their hands down, I want to know, is there anybody at that they consider themselves at an expert level? Okay, there are a few of you. Okay, so all I'm going to do now for the rest of the session is to move from the intentionality statements that you guys have developed to help you develop some actual tests that you're going to run after our session together. So there's actually going to be work that you're going to do with you and your partner, or you alone, and I'm going to give you a simple methodology to develop minimum viable tests, okay? So what is a minimum viable product or minimum viable test? It's really the idea that instead of waiting to produce the final version of your business and then test it, what you want to do is you want to do early versions of your product that will allow you to collect the maximum amount of learning before you actually launch it in the market. And I know a lot of you would know this because I did give pre-reading, and a lot of you have knowledge about this. And the person who came up with the concept of minimum viable test is Eric Ries. And I always like to show a very short video here, just reminding you of the process that Eric Ries went through when he came up with the idea of minimum viable testing. So let's take a stop here and let's understand a little bit how did Eric Ries come up with the concept of minimum viable testing. So I'm going to share that screen. It's a 2-minute video, and it will just kind of go back over how Eric Ries developed the idea of minimum viable testing. So I think this is it. Share. And it's just going to be 2 minutes, as I said, but it'll give you background, right?
In 2004, Eric Ries was the chief technology officer of a Silicon Valley startup called IMVU. IMVU's vision was to create a new online product that would allow users to build 3D avatars and interact with friends using their existing instant messaging networks. Their product would combine two popular trends at the time, 3D gaming and instant messaging. With complete confidence in their new business product, they got to work, putting in crazy hours to bring their idea to life. After 6 months, Eric and his team had incorporated all the major instant messaging services like AOL and MSN Messenger into the product, and it was finally ready to be released. On launch day, they eagerly awaited the thousands of people they thought would download their product. But there was one problem. No one was willing to download it. In an act of desperation, they invited target customers into their office and asked them questions as they interacted with the product. It became obvious after a few interviews that their base assumptions about what the customers actually wanted were completely wrong. It turns out that people didn't want to use existing instant messaging networks to invite their friends because they didn't know if the product was cool or not. However, people were willing to install a new instant messaging service that would allow them to talk with strangers using their 3D avatar. That meant Eric's work trying to integrate existing messaging services into the platform was a complete waste of time. Eric was frustrated, having wasted nearly 6 months of work building something nobody wanted. But he was thankful for having learned what his customers actually wanted before the company ran out of money. However, Eric couldn't help but wonder, did he really have to waste months of work to learn what his customers actually wanted? He quickly realized the answer was no, of course not. Eric could have simply integrated one instant messaging add-on service and shown it to a handful of customers and learned that no one wanted to use it. Eric took a step back and saw that his approach to building an innovative product was fundamentally wrong. His focus shouldn't have been on executing the perfect plan. His focus should have been learning which of his efforts were valuable to the end user in the least amount of time. Instead of relying on past experience, intuition, or focus groups to determine if what he was doing was valuable, he should have been deploying minimum viable products. A minimum viable product, or MVP for short, is a product made with a minimal amount of effort that is used to test specific assumptions regarding the value of an idea. The story of how Zappos, the online shoe company, got started is a great example of how to conduct an MVP test. Before Zappos became a billion-dollar online shoe company, founder Nick Swinmurn tested the assumption that customers were willing to buy shoes online. Instead of building a website and collecting a large inventory of shoes, Swinmurn approached local shoe stores, took pictures of their inventory, posted the pictures on a simple website, and then when a customer clicked on the buy button under the image of a shoe, he'd go back to the store, purchase the shoes at full price, then go to the post office and ship the shoes to the customer. Eventually, Swinmurn was unable to keep up with the number of online shoe orders, And at that point, he knew his online shoe company was a good idea. Once he validated his idea, he could be confident spending time and money, hiring a team, and collecting an inventory of shoes.
Okay, so I like showing that video because I think it's really important for you to understand the motivation behind where a lot of the thinking comes for things like minimum viable product, lean thinking. It's the idea that you shouldn't be investing in developing your complete business without testing all the assumptions associated with the idea. And that's simply what MVP is. It's the idea that I can take my idea and develop it into a series of critical assumptions that I can test individually rather than building out the whole idea and then realizing that it's not going to work. Okay, so this continues to stick. Sorry. So what we're going to do now is to actually show you a simplified way of developing minimum viable products. And then you guys are actually going to develop minimum viable products testing for your core ideas, right? And the process of developing a minimum viable product is a very simple standard process. How does this work? First, as you look at the diagram on the right, you prioritize and think, what are the most critical assumptions? So step one, what are the most critical assumptions that affects my business's viability or desirability from my customers? So you're not going to test for everything. One of the challenges I have with students when they start testing is they don't test for the most obvious, like pink elephant in the room. There's usually, with every single idea that you have, there are like 2 or 3 huge pink elephants in the room, and most students want to test for stuff that they want to look at. But you have to test for the big critical assumptions that can pretty much implode your idea if they're not validated. So the first thing you do is you prioritize, you then create a test. And once you create the test, you then run the test. At the end of the test, your assumption will either be validated, where you say, okay, I'm going to persevere down this route, or it's going to be rejected. And then you might have to either stop or pivot. And this is a simple process, regardless of how complex your minimum viable testing is or how simple. It's all following this step. You need to constantly ask yourself, what is the most critical thing that I need to test for? What's the most critical assumption that I'm making that I need to test for? If you really don't know, because I feel like sometimes when you're a young entrepreneur, a lot of times people assume that you would get what's the most critical assumption. And sometimes you genuinely don't know because you don't know the landscape and the business. This is where your advisors are really useful. Your advisors should be able to say to you, even if you can't see the wood from the trees, you know, those are the 2 or 3 things that you really need to test for to determine the viability of this business, the product market fit. Once you do that, I'm going to show you how to create simple tests now. You run the test in the market, and then you go through the process of either validating it or persevering, moving forward in the same way, or pivoting or changing direction, okay? And that's simply how it's done. And you can read more complex views of that. You can read all the different ways in which you can test. Like I gave you a template, I gave you some information about all the different ways people have used minimum viable tests. I hope you read that. But at the end of the day, it's a really simple 3-step process. Prioritize, build a test, run the test, determine whether you're going to pivot or persevere, right? And that's all you're going to do going forward. And the way I'm going to do that is we're going to, as a group together, do some minimum viable testing around my idea of drivers for drivers. And then I'm going to actually let you spend some minutes building some tests for your business, okay? So drivers for drivers, if you all have not applauded me yet, you all should. Drivers for drivers is my absolutely brilliant idea to develop my own app to go up against Uber. Yes, I have big dreams, people, to go up against Uber where the drivers own and control the app. And the idea is that loads of the drivers are super well educated. You'd be amazed how many Uber drivers have PhDs in their own country that are not recognized here, or that are businessmen in their own country. So my view is like they have the skills, they have the knowledge. We can build a financial model where they literally own part of the company. So it's like a drivers for drivers cooperative. And my idea is that I believe that if they own and control the app for ride sharing, we can get them highly committed to stabilize their income, which is my objective, as you know. We can also attract good customers like you and me who would want to help the drivers have a more stable life. And we can really compete against the other Uber ride sharing players starting from London, right? So that's my whole concept. I did the generative work. I understood the problem. I spent some time tearing it apart. I built a beautiful intentionality statement, and I'm now ready to go to test. So now I'm pushing it out to you guys. What are my three, listening to my pitch, what are the three critical tests, listening to the awesomeness and the largesse of my ideas, right? What are the three critical tests you think that I would need to test first and foremost with this idea? Anybody?
May I?
Yes, of course.
So as you pitched your idea, one of the important thing which I see is it's very difficult to ask to people to switch. They've been habitual of using, they know that it's problematic, that so many apps and everything, but asking them to switch to one to get that trust is a little thing we need to test, that people are able to use that or not.
Yes. So often, excellent, Alicia. Often one of the things that you have to test is about the customer and whether the customer is willing to pay or desirous of your service. So people are always ask me, Nadia, I mean, there's so many things I can test. What are the first sets of things you test? Alicia is so right. The first set of things you can test is, would your customer be really interested in this product? So that is definitely one of the top three, because my whole product is based on the idea that I can get people to switch from Uber to my product because it is socially good and that the drivers will be happier. So would you as customers switch to my product? That's the first thing I would want to test. What are the other two?
Whether the drivers are interested.
Oh, of course, right? So my whole thing is based on the fact that these drivers want to own and control. I mean, that's like the first one, right? So one is whether the customers would switch and support it. Two is whether the drivers are interested. What would be the third one?
How simple it is to actually access, because as you pointed that some of the drivers have PhDs, but the others don't, maybe.
Yeah.
So how simple is it to use the app?
Yes, so that's really good, but that's generally for phase 2 testing. So this is really important. Sampada, it's really excellent that you said that. The first set of testing is about the idea. The second set of testing is more about the functionality. Unless you're doing something like that requires you to use rocks from the moon for fuel or some crazy thing, that's the only reason why I would test functionality in phase 1. Phase 1 generally is about the desirability of the idea and the product market fit. Phase 2 is then about how can I functionally make it better, right? But phase 1, unless you're, as I said, unless you're doing something that requires 6G or some new sort of technology, then I would do that in phase 1. But generally, when you're testing critical assumptions, it's generally desirability, viability, desirability and viability. Would the customers be willing to pay? In this case, with the drivers, there's one more that would, so Sampada, that's excellent. I'm glad you brought that up, because you have to understand your business to understand when do I have to test for feasibility. Is it feasible? Can I use the moon rocks? Can I use but those are generally for more cutting edge stuff. For typical projects, particularly the projects that I've heard thus far, you're generally testing for desirability and market viability, okay? So excellent. Any one more? One more.
May I?
Yes.
I think probably is whether if they are willing to take ownership and control and they're capable of switching, will it actually make them more happy?
Oh, that's a really good one. So I would do all of that with the drivers, but yes, so I would lump that in with the driver desirability, but excellent. Yeah, so if you're saying, which is a deeper kind of, you've gone really deep, would it really have impact? So even if they did all that, will it really have the impact? Again, I would do that a little later on, but there's no reason why I can't test for it now, to be quite honest. So when I'm testing for desirability, I can test for that upfront too. So great point. Anybody else? One more idea. No, my third one is just my idea of what it would take to make this business work. But it doesn't mean, but for me, this is the third critical assumption. Think about what it would take to go up against Uber. What would it take to go up against Uber?
I think, can I
Shia.
So you're talking about helping drivers in stabilizing and increasing their income, which means you want them to have some kind of insurance.
Yeah. Well, I want them to own. So what they'll do is, as they get more trips, they own the company. So they'll get dividends. They actually will own it. It's like a cooperative of drivers.
Whether customers are willing to switch from Uber to this new company?
Yes, excellent. So the two things are around the customers and the drivers. So the third thing, just to tell you all, that someone with deep pockets would be interested in funding this. There's no way I can go up against a giant like Uber with £10,000 and winning a Generate competition. No offense, LG. I need somebody with deep pockets who would be interested in this. So for me, like it's as you guys said, my top 3 critical assumptions at this point of the business was testing whether the drivers were interested. It was testing whether the customers basically were interested. And then thirdly, whether or not there was any sort of interest by somebody with deep pockets, right? And those were my 3 critical tests. And then how did I test it? Well, after I chose the 3 risky assumptions, testing it was fairly easy, and there's a fairly easy rubric. The tests themselves aren't easy, but the rubric or the method that I'm showing you is easy, right? So I put in my critical assumption, I put in the test, I put in the measure, and then I put in the threshold. And I'm going to explain all that using examples. So let's say the first test, let's see if I'm lucky and I can make this big again so that, and it doesn't stick. So the first test is Uber drivers are interested in ownership and management of their app for greater control. So the critical test that I'm looking at is interest in ownership, management, becoming a member of this cooperative for a fee, if it means that they would have greater control. Now, how did I test this? I actually fake sold, and this is what I did. I really did this. Don't blame me. I fake sold this new ride sharing option to every Uber driver that when I jumped into his car. So I jumped in and said, hey, blah, 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 blah. Would you be interested in? And I fake sold this new option, drivers for drivers, right? And my metric, this is really important. What did I measure? I wanted to measure the number of drivers interested in moving to driver for drivers in London. So I fake sold this, and everybody I fake sold it to, I measured how many of them were interested in moving. And then I put a threshold. Now the threshold is the decision-making point. The threshold is really saying, what do I need to achieve in order to persevere down this route? Right? And my threshold was 25% of the drivers should show me interest in my driver for driver app. So, and I must have tested a minimum of 100 drivers. So of the 100 drivers, I need at least 25 people to tell me I would, and this is just interest, I would be interested in the driver for drivers app. What happened when I did it? Well, sadly, there's a good side and a bad side. 33% of the drivers found that it was quote unquote a unique option, and they would be very, very happy to get involved in an app like this, where they would control the app, control the fees, and be the owners of the app. What they didn't want to do is to manage it. Even the most skilled drivers who had a previous life in management said, I have no interest in managing or building this company. But if you built a company, we would be happy to get ownership and we would be invested. And that's 33% of the drivers that I spoke to. So because of that, let's look at it. My measure is the number of drivers interested in the app. And my threshold is that at least 25% of the drivers should be interested for me to move on. And I got 33% of the drivers. Therefore, on one hand, I can persevere on the idea that the drivers want ownership. But on the other hand, I got 0 drivers who were interested in management. So I need to pivot away from the idea that the drivers would manage this. Does that make sense, everybody? Let me do another one.
Sorry, Nadia, there's a question from someone who can speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Joanna is asking why 25%?
Because I actually worked it out. Sorry, that's a great question. So I actually worked it out. There are 300,000 Uber drivers in London. Sorry, Uber drivers in England. There are 40,000 Uber drivers in London. I think at the end of the day, if we get a quarter of that, 10,000 Uber drivers in London, who would be interested? Of that, I just thought there would be some attrition, people who say that they're interested, but they're not interested. We have a nice small base to start from. So I did do it in my head mentally based on numbers, okay? So you would, but this is not an exact science at this point. Remember, we're just moving from your hypothesis, which is your idea about how to solve a problem that you've identified. We're just moving from that hypothesis now into testing it. So this is early stages. As you get more mature, you'd have more data. And then, but I kind of did it based on the rough numbers in the market. And actually, that's a good question. So these are usually quick and dirty estimates.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Mom, you said that 33% of them accepted, but rest 67, what about them? What was the main reason they were saying no?
They just think that it'll never happen. Like it's pipe dreams. They thought that I was a nice girl. Part of it was probably me. I mean, I'm in like sneakers and looking like 25 with a cap on, telling them that I'm going up against Uber. Let's just say I didn't plan it properly. Every time I jumped into an Uber, I just asked them, I had it with me and I showed them the proposal. So part of it could have been that they just didn't think that I could ever go up against Uber. Part of it, they just thought it was pipe dreams. And part of it really just didn't care. Like, they're just like, look, we just want more money. We don't want to be involved. We don't want to, I don't want this headache. The reason why I'm doing Uber here is because I don't want the headache of management. I don't want the headache of, we just want to make more money, right? And so looking at this, dividends and all of that, it was just too complex. So that is a good question. So yeah, so 66.66% were like, no, meh, not interested. But 33% were really excited. They were like, we would love to have ownership. I would love to control, because they understood that it allowed them also to control their fees. The emissions issue that they're having is that they have to pay out of their pockets if they ever go into central London. Like, people who had vision really got it, but they still didn't want to do anything in management. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you think particularly because you said you're going against Uber, it kind of worked negatively for you?
Oh, I didn't tell them that, but they're smart enough to kind of figure out that I was going against Uber. I'm telling you guys that, but I would never pitch it like that. I was just like, oh, there's this amazing new app to develop a driver cooperative where the drivers come together and they own and control the companies and and then you'll have the app and then blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I wouldn't pitch it like that. I mean, clearly in a cap, a t-shirt, like, I wouldn't say, hey, I'm going up against Uber, unless I say like Jay-Z is my benefactor or something, I don't know, so they won't believe me. Okay. But the other ones really believed in it. So I really felt like I had enough to persevere with the idea, but just not with them being managers. So I had to pivot on them managing the organization, but I could persevere on the idea that they can actually, that we can actually build this model.
Okay. I also had a question, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. Ask away.
Basically, I was wondering, what were the kind of the details of the process? Like, did you send like kind of a questionnaire out, and how did you select? Like, how did you come to a list of drivers that you sent the questionnaires to? If that's what you did, like, I'd be interested in basically the details of the process.
No, so this is awesome. MVPs take you away. I love this question. Thank you very much. I love when you guys ask questions that I actually want to talk about something. You ask the question. It's like we're on the same wavelength. So MVPs are really sexy, guys. MVPs are really sexy because it's not the traditional surveys and stuff, which is why I kind of gave you guys that pre-reading. And honestly, if we had another hour, I would go through multiple cases of creative MVPs, but we don't have that time. And I respect your time, so I'm trying to finish as close as possible to on time. So no, I actually did, I fake sold them an app. So I had a page with a drawing of an app with a logo driver for drivers, and I fake sold them. There were no questionnaires. MVPs take you much closer to the customer. When you think of an MVP, don't think of surveys. It's really not about surveys. And I mean, you can do surveys and MVPs, look at the list I gave you. It's about going further and giving people an experience about what's to come, a sort of teaser about what's to come, and let them respond to that. Because if I did a survey, it would have been probably 80% would say yes. Because I'm just saying, can I take a survey? And then they'll say yes. Once I showed him kind of, this is what the app would be and this is what the app would look like, and I'm paying them, so they were nice to me, then that's when the problems came, right? But if I just said, can I take a survey? Are you interested? Yes, yes. I mean, they don't have time for you. Once I showed them it, they're like, oh, I don't know about that. Okay. Because it felt also more real, right? A survey means nothing to a lot of people. So one thing I want to say to you guys is, when you start thinking of your MVP, do not think of traditional MVPs. Do not think of surveys and stuff. Actually look into the MVP methods and choose some of the ones, whether you're fake selling, whether you're creating just a page online that people click on and you test their clicks, whether look at the more creative ones. They're the ones that will really give you the information.
Great, thank you so much.
No problem. So it's 6 minutes past. So we have two options now. I can run through the other two tests that I did and what happened, or we can actually stop now and I can have you guys develop one test for your intentionality statement, and then maybe have a few presentations, one or two people present those tests at the end. It's up to you guys. We can either run through this, or if you think, look, it's easy for me to develop tests, we want you to kind of finish with the example of driver for drivers. What do you guys feel? Okay, so for those who want to continue with the driver for drivers example, can you kind of raise your hand? Jennifer, can you give me a sense of how many people are raising their hand? And for those of you who just want to take the time, yeah, you want to continue with driver for drivers? Yeah? Okay, so let's continue with that. Okay, so this is my first test, and clearly I did not do amazing. It's only 33%. I also got nobody who's interested in managing it, right? So my second test, oh, again, it's stuck. Not sure why this keeps happening. So let me go back. So we're gonna do it on the small screen. Sorry guys, because it keeps getting stuck. So my second test is whether or not the customers would be committed to move from Uber to this app. And honestly, so my critical assumption is that somehow by selling customers that this app is more socially acceptable. I mean, Uber is evil, blah, 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 blah. This app is more socially acceptable, that I would actually get customers to come over to my driver for drivers. So my test was actually, this time it was a Facebook survey that I actually, because I wanted to get a large group of people, and loads of people use Uber. So I actually, surged? What is it when you pay in Facebook and it ensures that the survey goes to multiple people? I can't remember, but I actually paid to get the survey out there. My measure was customer priorities. So I didn't just look at whether or not they would move for social reasons, but I wanted to understand what motivated the customers. And my threshold, I wanted greater than 50% would use the driver own, would confirm that they would be interested in using the driver owned app for social good. And I need at least 500 people surveyed. The outcome is that I actually had to pivot. Customers are attracted to lowest cost. All the customers said, all we care about is the lowest cost of the drive, you know. The driver own app didn't matter to them at all. Although some customers, seeing the idea, actually said that they would be interested in getting some skin in the game. So some of them said, can customers have ownership into the company? But in terms of what I was testing, none of the customers felt that they would move from Uber to this app necessarily just because this app was now exhibiting social good. So I have to pivot from that assumption. And then my third assumption, which is whether or not I can get some sort of OEM, which is like a Mercedes-Benz or someone with deep pockets to invest in this. And the idea that the driver commitment would attract a big player. I actually pitched this. I have friends who have a lot of moolah cash. So I actually pitched this to a few of them who've invested in big projects like Airbnb and all of those things. So I actually did a pitch showing them this is all the information I collected. Is this something that you would be interested in? And my metric was initial interest. And I just wanted 2 of these really savvy investors to tell me that there's interest in this, that it's worth my time to pursue it. And sadly, there was no interest at all at this early stage. And they said for them to be interested, there would have to be such a huge proof of concept that I would have to have, earned something like, or attracted something like millions of dollars to do a huge proof of concept. So they wouldn't just want a minimum viable product. They would want a huge proof of concept all over London for 6 months, that this is working, that I'm attracting the people, and then they would maybe consider investing. So on my third one, that an OEM or someone with deep pockets would be interested in this, I actually got a no. So therefore I have to pivot, okay? So this is how you do the testing, right? So you actually think, what is my intentionality? And then based on my intentionality statement, what are my top 3 riskiest assumptions? And then how do I develop tests creatively, minimum viable product tests to test things in the market? So this is the exercise I wanted you guys to do, but we're almost out of time. So can I suggest that you guys, after this session, actually take the time to do this? It will really help. And again, if you don't know whether or not you're testing the most critical assumptions, you should have some sort of advisory panel, and you can bounce your intentionality off them. Immediately, anybody who understands the market will tell you as soon as they hear your idea, oh my gosh, you need to test for this, this, this. You will not get an investor unless you do this, this, this. Don't think about later down with the functionality and how it will function. Those are later tests. In the early stages of the idea, you're looking at the viability and the viability of the idea. Does it fit the market? Does it fit the customer? Does it fit the people who will pay for it? Those are the most important things. Once you have enough information about that, that's when you can jump off and do more detailed stuff. All have any questions?
Nadia, there's a comment in the chat. It's from Sophia. I don't know.
Yes.
Do you want to open your mic and share it? Because I think it's an interesting
I'm doing masters in social innovation and entrepreneurship right now, and from my experience, like sadly, unless the product has a real competitive advantage with the average businesses or like with the businesses that are already in the market, it's very rare that the big portion of customers would be attracted only by its like social aspect.
No, I think that's a brilliant point. I mean, I would say that depends, because I think some sectors, the social aspect really has like a movement or following. So what I find is I agree with your statement in general, and it's actually quite an intelligent statement. But I think if you look at the sustainability world, that's where I would deviate from you. There are people who are like, these things are movements and they are ways of life. So depending on when you do projects where there's a huge movement existing. So for example, what am I talking about? I'm talking about the zero waste movement. So if you do a project in a zero waste space, you would find that there are people who would just be attracted to it because of that. The whole vegan, vegetarianism. So it depends on your product profile. But I do agree, for a standard competitive product, to actually just say it has a social good, you wouldn't get people necessarily be attracted to it. But for things where you have huge movements, global movements, you could easily get people to just switch based on the fact that the product is more sustainable for some reason and doesn't hurt the environment. So you really have to kind of know and be aware of what's going on in the environment. But yeah, I agree. For the standard commercial project, just to say, oh, I have a more social version, people, I learned the hard way, trust me, through this process, that people are like, no, thank you, tough, if the Uber drivers go without food, there's not a big deal, I just want the lowest cost taxi available, right? Yeah. And so that's a great point.
I also have a small question. Like I'm always wondering, because MVP doesn't really apply to what I'm trying to do, or maybe, okay, it applies, but I don't know how. Like it usually, like whenever I read anything on MVP, it's like business to customer kind of approach. And I'm thinking, like, how would you go about testing an idea which is B2B?
Oh no, you can definitely do MVPs B2B, like pitches and that sort of thing. So maybe it'll help if you give me the idea, and then we can see if you want to share your idea. I don't know if your idea is still sort of being formed, but if you want to share like a B2B idea, and then we can brainstorm some MVPs.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the process of development, but the general idea is to support the inclusive education in Ukraine and try to find a product which could be useful for the school, for the mainstream school, and allow the mainstream school to take in more children with physical disabilities. For example, this could be visual impairments.
Okay, so you're saying that what you're trying to do is you're trying to innovate or develop a product that will encourage schools to take in more people with visual impairments, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to actually do that MVP in the school itself. You can do it on a playground. You can do it. Do you understand what I mean? So with an MVP, a big part of it is being creative. So if I wanted to test that product, I probably won't. You're right. You may not get access to test it in a school, but you may get access to test it in kids' jamboree. I know maybe that's very American, but you know, like when kids come together and play in this jamboree area, and you might be able to test it there. So you might be able to test it on test your product in after school services. And you also might be able to test your products creatively by even creating screenshots and letting the educators go online and play with the product. So the thing about an MVP, and when your idea is formed in sort of, you formed it more, I'm happy to talk to you later on for us to come up with some serious tests. But the thing about an MVP is that a lot of times you're looking at the most creative way to get to the solution. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily testing it exactly in the environment where the idea is going to be used. And with B2B, I find like you have to kind of think, where else can I test this in a way that doesn't threaten anyone, right? So, but it is a good reflection. It's much easier to test B2C with MVP than B2B, but I've seen many people test B2B.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, great questions. Any other questions about MVPs?
Nadia, there's 2 hands raised. Donna, I'm going to call on them. Donna, if you're with us. She wrote in the chat, if 2 of the 3 assumptions were not as expected, how did you decide to go on with the idea?
Oh,
sorry,
I didn't know.
I had to unmute myself.
Oh, no. So yeah, the truth is I looked at that, and of course the external environment changed, as you know, because now Uber workers are now employees in England. I think the law has changed. So I actually decided not to go forward with the idea, but if I were going forward with the idea, I would probably do it with my deep pockets would be the government. I would choose a third world country where the government would be supportive. So for example, they're very dependent on taxi drivers. So for example, St. Lucia, or because I know St. Lucia very well, or some of the countries that are tourist oriented, where they're very dependent on the taxi trade. And I would work with the deep pockets of the government to develop a cooperative of drivers. So I would take this out of London, because to me, the project doesn't really suit London, particularly because the legislative agenda has changed in the sense that Uber drivers are now officially employees of the organization. So when they're not working, they're due for several benefits that they didn't have when I was looking at the idea. And that's one thing that you have to understand. The point of this is that you take a dispassionate, unemotional look at the idea. If I was still emotional, Nadia, I would be like, yes, I'm powering on. But the market has changed. The idea doesn't look feasible in this market. So either I move it to another market where it's feasible, or I completely change the idea completely, right? So for me, if I can't get people who would fund the idea, and I really can't, and the customers aren't really going to come over to the idea, to me, this idea is not even worth spending that much more time you know, or I completely take the idea and I put it in a market where the conditions are different and I would get support. So I would, based on my background, because I'm from the Caribbean, I would take the idea to like a St. Lucia or something, and I would partner with the government, or even like Kenya, or partner with the government to say, hey, I know that let's professionalize your taxi service because a large percentage of your country is dependent on it. And a large percentage of your tourism. And I have an idea to give the drivers ownership, which will lead to greater capital accumulation and greater wealth and get them out of poverty. I think that if I pitch that to a government, that would be far more interesting than pitching it to Mercedes-Benz. So that's how I would change the idea. Clearly, I've abandoned the idea. Next question.
Two more lined up. Arthur has the hand raised.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I just wonder if you could please tell how do you design later stage testing. So let's assume you launched the MVP, like real application or a platform. How do you test with users? How do you design the tests, and what is the specifics of it?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So that it's very hard to be general. So I like your idea. So you're saying after we've done the basic feasibility, like does the idea make sense, basically? Do customers want it? Will somebody pay for it? This is just early stuff. Then you're talking about starting to design sort of the user experience and the functionality of things. That's where the testing becomes really interesting. What you have to do, the process is the same, meaning you'll have so many things to test that I would say that the key is, I think you should divide the test into 2 or 3 types of tests. The first test is the user experience and what the users how the users will interact with your organization. The second type of test is what I consider whether or not your product will fit the market in much more detail, right? So you really kind of go into how your product meets the needs of the market. And the third type of test is really about the revenue model. So those are generally the next 3 tests people generally do, right? Which is more detailed user experience. And that's a fairly easy test. They have like 10 different tests. So for example, a user experience test might be to actually create the platform online and see and let the users click on the platform as if they're interested. That's one. The second one is to do like Zappos if it's a product. Create the platform even before you have the product and let the users pre-order. The third form is as you get more detail and you're trying to really see if there's user demand and product market fit, is to do a crowdsourcing campaign. Crowdsourcing campaigns are really, really excellent for pre-selling, and investors really love them because generally it shows they sort of, I shouldn't say love them, it's an indication that there's real market interest. So the way you actually do a if your idea is social enough, you do a crowdfunding campaign where you put your idea out and you may aim to raise 30,000, but you're pre-selling the product, which then tells you that you have 30,000 products out there in the market. So that's another way. So there are a huge range of ways. And actually the document that I sent and Jennifer sent to you prior to will actually detail all the different types of tests that you can do. But the next phase of testing is really more granular. It's about getting really into the user experience, getting proof of the product market fit. It's not about whether or not the market wants the idea. I want proof. I want hard proof that people actually want the product, right? And then other than that, about how you make money. Because people are now interested in, can you really make money from this? Is this sustainable? So those are the next 3 types of tests, and the document I sent will give you details.
Okay, just one more clarification. So let's assume you have a platform, you have user signups, and how do you interact with users? Do you have a specific focus group, or do you reach out every single customer and interview him or her?
Oh no, this is great. No. MVPs, the way they do it is really creative. They actually use Google Analytics. So what you do, so let's say you're creating a product that's not really created yet, but you have an idea that what you want to do is to create sustainable zero sugar jams. I don't know. because there's diabetes, there are a whole load of issues, and you just want everybody to get healthy. So let's say that's your product. So let's say I built a platform with that. What I would do is I would actually put the jams on, even before I have a supply of jams. You would put the jam pictures on, you put coming soon, and you would ask people to pre-order. So you're not actually interviewing them. They will click on it and then they will pre-order. And that will give you an indication of what they want. So interestingly enough, how would you even get people to go to your website? So you can first post it on Facebook, and then I don't know, Jennifer, what's it called, or Suisha? Surging? What is it when you pay Facebook to kind of promote your link?
Sponsored.
Or whatever, sponsored, whatever. You put it on Facebook, you hope that it goes viral, Instagram, everything else, and you push people to go onto your website. When they go onto your website, you ask them to do pre-orders, and by their choices, you'll see that, oh, people are really interested in the chia seed banana jams, but they're really not interested in chia seed strawberry. So it actually can tell you, it can actually indicate how many people will be willing to buy your product. You're not going to interview them. You're actually going to put it up and let them make choices that are as close as possible to reality. And it's okay, because when they try to cash out, you'll say, okay, coming soon, and then so they know that they're not going to get the product, but you tell them that it's coming soon, and you give them some timeline, 3 to 6 months or something.
Great. Nadia,
okay, great. Thank you.
Okay.
Amazing. I'm conscious that we're over time. I'm going to give a chance to the last two questions. Camilla, ping me.
Yes, thank you. Hey, Nadia. Hey, so I have it was actually a really interesting discussion where you just had now, because it's about creating a waiting list. And that would be something that you can do in the testing phase as well, right? Creating a waiting list, and then sort of just to see, well, how many are actually interested. And then the second phase would be actually to go to crowdfunding, to ask, well, would you sort of subscribe in advance, well, in order to use that money to fund the product?
Yeah. So for me, the second phase is more about the point where I actually know. Actually, this is a really great question. My second phase is the fact that I've actually figured out the bugs in my general idea, and I'm really getting down into execution. So if you remember the model that I showed you, second phase, sorry, I just want to go back. The second phase would be, I'm not sure if you're seeing my cursor, it will be about this. So I have an idea worth pursuing, and I'm now trying to work out kinks around the idea, right? So I'm now trying to work out more deeply and more credibly what is the demand for my idea, and what I know the idea is generally worth pursuing, but I'm trying to really go deeper and work out the user experience and what the demand is and that sort of thing. So, and all those things should be seen as pre-orders. I just want to be careful. I would not distinguish between crowdfunding and the website option I gave you. All of those should be pre-orders, right? What you don't want to do is to piss off clients. You don't want to piss me off because I'm now excited about chia seed banana jam, and you're really not going to ever create it. You were just doing it to kind of figure out if I wanted it. This is stuff in the second phase, because it's notice in the Zappos example, he sent the shoes. He didn't just have you go in, click on shoes, and then say, okay, thank you very much for your interest, and then nothing is ever said. So. So this is why which is why I like it. It's the second phase of testing where you're pretty sure that your idea is worth pursuing. You have enough information that, this is what I've worked out, the massive kinks in the idea. I think I have enough. I mean, it's still going to change and grow, but at least I know I'm in the right direction. So now it's really about kind of building out the product, pre-orders, finding out what the market wants. So both of those options, I would say, is a way of getting pre-orders for you to actually show somebody, look, I have pre-orders through crowdfunding, or I have pre-orders through my website, or I have pre-orders through Amazon, even if your product doesn't exist. And I know people have a challenge with MVPs because they're like, but Nadia, like I'm selling something that doesn't exist. But if your intention is to make it and you've already tested the, chia seed banana jam, right? You've tested it and you know and you've tested 3, but you just don't know which one you're going to launch on the market, and you pretty much have a recipe and you're pretty much there, but you're not sure, then you can actually start setting up pre-orders and send it out. And then even that will give you a response. So you might be like, what's the reorder rate? How many people did I send it out to that reorder? You know, those are the types of things investors like to hear.
Mm-hmm. But what if actually it sort of, the waiting list will depend on the product's feasibility, because it may be a bit politically difficult project, but not impossible?
So I wouldn't actually go to selling something if I don't know that I can deliver it. Even if I deliver it in a delayed way, because the worst thing, as I said, is to piss off your future customers. Because, and also there are a million other MVP approaches. And I can try to see if I can find you a video that actually walks through all of them. Because part of it is,
excellent,
if you can understand, there are like about, I don't know how many, 26 different approaches. And in fact, I have a diagram that shows, and we can't go through now, every MVP approach is not created equal. So this is a diagram, and I think this is Studio Zao, but I don't know if it's their work or if it's inspired by someone else, or if, because I've seen it in multiple places, but I just want to attribute it to Studio Zao. But the idea, these are just some examples of MVP. So on this 2x2 already, you're seeing about 12 examples. And it's something that I wanted to say, that every MVP is not created equal. Some give you a stronger indication of evidence, right? And some give you less evidence. So you have to determine, and as far as I'm concerned, as the business develops, you need MVPs with strong evidentiary support, right? So all MVPs Obviously. Are not created equal. And the truth is, the ones that generate higher evidence require greater resources. So there's a catch-22. So the idea is that your early MVPs, you put in limited resources, but you expect the evidence to be lower. And then as you build out the business, your MVP should increase in evidence, but it will also increase in the resources it takes to build the MVP.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
But I would never promise anybody. I'm just not that.
No, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so, because it's a bit of a complicated product.
Okay. I think I probably need to hear more about the product, but I swear to you, if you read Eric Ries's book, The Lean Startup, he has amazing. He even talked about an MVP for a reforestation project. You're thinking, how can you have a reforestation project with an MVP? He gives you so many examples of MVP. So I think what you need to do, and what I would encourage all of you to do, because I hope at the end of this, I've defined the process for you. But what I need you to do is not just think about the process, but empower yourself with the knowledge of all the different types of MVPs, so that you will say, okay, I'm not just going to do surveys, or I'm actually going to find creative ways of validating my learning. Okay. And this is another table that shows that depending on what you want to prove, they're different. These are all MVPs in the table, right? So this is another table that I wanted to share with you guys, and you guys can read more. If you're looking to prove demand, there are certain MVPs. If you're looking to do a proof of concept, there's something called the Wizard of Oz. There's a concierge MVP. There's so many. And then if you're looking at the values and the drivers and stuff, there are a whole set of different MVPs. So MVPs are not created the same. And at the end of this, if anything I want to impart to you guys is to empower yourself with knowledge of the range of MVPs, so that you can actually choose more sophisticated MVPs to test what you want to test, rather than just sending out a Facebook survey or doing that, right? Okay. I think there's one last question. Is there, Jennifer?
There was a comment in the chat from Daniel. Do you want to bring it up before we close?
Yeah, I think this is a lot.
Yeah, I was quite interested in, with the Uber example, you kind of know who you want to reach out to. So if you go on taxi journeys, then those are your like target customer.
Yeah.
Whereas with, say, Clubhouse, for example, it's really open to anyone. I know there was a bit of exclusivity, but as a social network, anyone could kind of get involved if they wanted to. And I was wondering, how do you build an MVP test which is maybe less specific?
Can you read me your intentionality pitch, because it'll give me a little more clarity, and then I can be much more specific.
Yeah, sure. So what we want to do is to tackle barriers to social inclusion and opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's aimed at people that want to connect on a one-to-one basis, mm-hmm. Rather than in groups. Mm-hmm. And it addresses the challenge of connecting to people outside of your immediate network. So first, mm-hmm. second connections, friends and family. Mm-hmm. And in two ways. So people that are more aligned in terms of experience or insight or perspective that your immediate network doesn't have. Or two, if you feel more comfortable having a conversation that isn't with your immediate network. So say, for example, a kid's being bullied at school, maybe it might be quite useful for him to speak to someone that was previously bullied, but now they're 40 years old and they have a whole different perspective on it. And so having access to that person might be quite helpful. And it's important, I think there's an opportunity to allow people to collaborate more than we currently do. And so it's exciting to be able to drive that forward.
Yeah, so I have a few examples of MVPs here that I knew I would never get time to run through, but I would probably try to do a concierge approach, which is where I carry out that service completely manually. I'll have in an Excel spreadsheet a list of people, and then I'll have a list of people in need, and then I'll actually do it by the phone. I know, I'm not saying an app, I know. It's probably offensive and you're shaking, but I would actually test that model through a concierge model. And the concierge model is just when you carry out the service completely manually and on both sides. So literally Excel spreadsheet, another sheet on the next side, and then you carry it out manually for a while before you actually run the service and build the app and stuff. So you understand where the need is, you understand, and I do it in a small area. So maybe I sell the manual service to an orphanage, or I sell the manual service to something, and then I run that manually for a bit, and then I use that to build what would be important in the app, what sort of filters, what sort of things people ask you, that sort of thing, right? So that's what I would do.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing that you could do is a single feature product. So you can actually, which is the other end, where you actually build one real product, meaning a bullying. So I'm only going to focus on bullying. So I'm not going to focus on all my services. So you can kind of combine that in the concierge model. But as I said, as you empower yourself, you need to just read really cool examples of MVPs. And once you do that and you understand what people are done, then you can really test your business properly and not spend 2 years building a business. Like for me, I would not have wanted to spend 2 years invested in this Uber idea, because I know that it has legs, meaning helping those people would make a real difference in their lives. But without an OEM, without real customer support for the social good part, it's an uphill battle that I wouldn't want to do. So I would just pivot and move it to another market or not do it at all. And that's the kind of thing I want. I want you to get that information where you have this wonderful idea. And I think you have to delve a little deeper into the problem, but you have a wonderful idea and a really commendable idea, but you don't want to spend 2 years building something in a way that's really not sustainable. So in your case, for sure, I would do a concierge model.
Okay.
Okay.
And would that be a bit like a marketplace? So you find people on each end of the market, if you like, and then connect them up manually.
Yeah, I mean that, and just do it on a small scale, connect them up and see the traction, because again, revenue model, all those things. So we're talking about later testing. So I'm assuming that you have decided that your idea is worth pursuing, and now you're trying to build the product out and build how it would work. Yeah, I would definitely do a concierge if I were you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Any other questions, guys?
I'm gonna actually wrap up. We've gone over time, and I have to say that the retention rate here is amazing. So that's testament to how valuable what you shared with us is, Nadia. So thank you so much. Nadia, will you share the slides with LJ, and then we'll loop back to those who signed up?
Yeah, of course.
That's great. I'm popping into the chat for everyone here the link to the toolkit, and the whole focus one area is all about how do you move from idea to action. So you'll see some of those slides from Studio Zao, the one that Nadia shared about the quadrant, how much you put into how much you get out, and as she said, not every test is equal. So that's in there along with other resources. I'm also putting into the chat the podcast episode we created, Solution and myself, for this topic area focused on ideas to action. And in it, we interview Jamie, who is the founder of Studio Zao. So he gives another perspective on testing and just building upon all the great things that we learned from Nadia tonight. So copy those links. I want to give a huge thank you to Nadia. It's always fun to learn with you, from you. I just learned so much, always. It's engaging. So thank you everyone who joined. Happy to get your feedback. And I'll connect with LJ to hopefully she'll share the Slack channel with you so you can also connect with each other. Thanks for joining. It's awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys, for sticking around. Okay.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you.
Good luck with your ventures as you develop your ideas. Don't be shy. I think getting feedback and new perspectives is always super helpful. So reach out to me, to LJ, to anybody at Generate, and get that feedback. So that's what we're here for. Happy to see you all.
Okay, take care, guys.
Bye, everyone.